Grandfather's map. The old house smelled of dust and forgotten memories as Jake pushed open the heavy white door. His grandfather's funeral had been 3 days ago, and now he stood in the hallway where he had spent countless summers as a child, listening to stories too strange to be true. "Everything seems smaller than I remember," Jake said, running his fingers along the familiar wallpaper. The silence felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the house itself was mourning the loss of a long-lived grandfather. His mother had asked him to sort Grandpa Henry's things, a task that was both intimate and tedious. Where do you start when someone's whole life is inside these walls? Jake decided to start in the study, where his grandfather spent most of his time in his last years. The study was exactly as he remembered it. Bookshelves lined 3 walls and were filled with leather-bound tomes on history, archaeology, and adventure stories. The old mahogany desk stood by the window, where the afternoon sunlight streamed across its surface. Jake could almost see his grandfather there, bent over an old text, reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. "Time to get to work," Jake said aloud, trying to shake off the melancholy that threatened to overwhelm him. He opened the first drawer of the desk and began rummaging through its contents. Old letters, fountain pens, a pocket watch that had stopped ticking years ago. Nothing surprising until he reached the bottom drawer. His fingers felt something unusual hidden at the very back. An envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax, with her grandfather's name written on the front in his distinctive handwriting, "For Jake when the time comes." Jake's heart began to race. What could his grandfather have wanted him to find? He carefully broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written on cream-colored paper in what looked like a very old map. The letter was dated only 6 months ago. "Dear Jake, if you are reading this, it means I have finally joined your grandmother on the other side. I hope my stories have not been completely wasted on you over the years, because what I am about to tell you is the most important story of all. This is not fiction, my son. It never has been. When I told you about treasure hunters and lost fortunes, you always thought I was telling fairy tales. But every word was true. My father, your great-grandfather Samuel, was part of a group that discovered something extraordinary in 1923. They found a cache of gold and artifacts hidden by outlaws in the 1800s and buried in a small town called Millbrook, about 300 miles west of here. This is the original map." Knowing that such a discovery would attract unwanted attention, Samuel and his partners decided to take only what they needed and leave the rest. They swore that the secret would only be passed on to the family when the time was right. I was never brave enough to pursue it. Your grandmother thought I was crazy enough as it was. But you, Jake, you have that adventurous spirit that burned in Samuel's eyes. That same curiosity drove him to explore places others were afraid to go. The town of Millbrook still exists, but it's much smaller now than it was in Samuel's time. The markers on the map should still be there. The old church, the bridge over Miller's Creek, the cemetery on the hill. Use these to orient yourself and the rest will become clear. But be careful, son. Treasure hunting isn't just about finding gold. It's about understanding the past, respecting those who came before us, and knowing when to walk away. Some secrets are worth keeping and some treasures are worth more than money. Trust your instincts, ask the right questions, and remember that the greatest treasures in life are the connections we make along the way. With all my love and faith in you, Grandpa Henry. Jake's hands shook as he put the letter down and studied the map. It was drawn on what looked like parchment, but it was old paper, probably yellowed with age. The details were incredible. Every building, every street, every natural landmark was carefully marked with precise ink strokes. "This is impossible," Jake whispered, but even as he said it, he knew he was going to Millbrook. His grandfather had never lied to him about anything important. Why should he start now? Jake spent the next hour studying the map and comparing it to modern maps he had found on the internet. Millbrook was indeed a real place, a small town that had seen better days. According to the internet, it had been a thriving community during the mining boom of the early 1900s, but had declined dramatically over the decades. The population was now less than 800 people. 3 days later, Jake was driving west on Highway 40, his grandfather's map neatly folded in his jacket pocket. He had taken 2 weeks off work, telling his boss he needed time to settle his grandfather's estate. It wasn't a complete lie. The landscape slowly changed from suburbs to rolling hills and farmland. Jake found himself thinking about all the stories his grandfather had told him over the years. Adventures in faraway places, mysterious discoveries, narrow escapes from dangerous situations. He'd always thought they were just fun fictions, but now he wondered how many of them could be true. Millbrook's first sign appeared just before noon. Historic downtown, next exit. Jake's pulse quickened as he ascended the ramp and found himself on a narrow two-lane road through dense woods. After about 10 minutes, the trees opened up to reveal a small town that seemed frozen in time. The main street was lined with old brick buildings, many showing their age. A few shops were still in business, but most of the storefronts were empty and the windows were covered with yellowing newspapers. Jake parked in front of a small diner called Maggie's Place, which seemed to be the only restaurant in town. The bell above the door rang as Jake walked in. Inside was a classic small-town diner, with red vinyl booths and a long counter with swivel stools. An older woman with gray hair and kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Hello, stranger. Are you passing through or staying a while?" "Actually, I'm not sure yet," Jake replied, sliding onto one of the stools. "I'm here to do some research on the history of the town. My name is Jake Morrison." "I'm Maggie," the woman said, holding out her hand. "I've lived here all my life, so I can help you. What kind of history are you interested in?" Jake hesitated. He couldn't exactly tell her he was looking for buried treasure. "I'm interested in the development of the town in the early 1900s. Apparently my great-grandfather spent some time here in the 1920s. Maggie's eyes lit up. Oh, it was an interesting time for Millbrook. The mining boom was just ending, but there was still a lot of activity. Lots of people coming and going, some of them not in good faith, if you ask me." "What do you mean?" "There were rumors that bandits were using the area to hide stolen goods. There are dozens of caves and old mine shafts in the mountains around here. Perfect places to hide something you don't want found." Maggie lowered her voice and leaned closer. "My grandmother used to tell stories about strange men coming into town, buying supplies, and disappearing into the hills for weeks." Jake's heart began to race. This was exactly what he had been hoping to hear. "Do you know where any of these caves might be?" "Some, of course. But I wouldn't recommend exploring alone. It's easy to get lost there and some of the old mine shafts are dangerous. Why don't you tell me what you're really looking for, honey?" Jake studied Maggie's face. She seemed trustworthy and he would need local help if he had any chance of finding the treasure. "Can I trust you with something important? I've been keeping this town's secrets for 70 years. I think I can handle one more." Jake pulled out the map and spread it out on the counter. Maggie's eyes widened as she studied the detailed drawing. "God, this is incredible. Where did you get this?" "My grandfather left it to me. He said it would lead to something hidden since the 1920s. Maggie was silent for a long moment and studied the map carefully. "This church here is St. Michael's. It's still standing, even though it's been abandoned for 20 years. And this bridge over Miller's Creek is the old stone bridge about 2 miles north of town. But this building here," he pointed to a building marked with an X, "this was the old mining office. It burned down in 1947. So the map might not be accurate anymore. The landscape doesn't change much, but the buildings do. I'll get my grandson Tommy. He knows these hills better than anyone and he's in his right mind. Maggie disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later with a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. He had a stern look that came from spending most of his time outdoors. "Tommy, this is Jake. He has something interesting to show you." Tommy studied the map with the same attention his grandmother had given it. "This is really detailed work. Whoever drew this knew the area very well." He pointed to a few places marked on the map. "These are all real places, but some of them are no longer easy to find. Do you want to help me explore some of these places?" Jake asked. "Depends on what we're looking for," Tommy answered carefully. Jake took a deep breath. "My great-grandfather was involved in hiding something valuable in the 1920s. According to family legend, it's still out there somewhere." Tommy grinned. "You mean like treasure hunting? That sounds a lot more interesting than my usual routine of fixing farm implements." "It could be dangerous," Jake warned. "And there's no guarantee we'll find anything. Life's too short to play it safe all the time," Tommy said. "When do we start?" They decided to start the search the next morning. Jake checked into the town's only motel, a modest place that had seen better days but was clean and comfortable. That evening he sat in his room, studying the map and trying to develop a strategy. The next morning was clear and cool, perfect weather for hiking. Tommy picked him up in a well-used pickup truck full of backpacks, rope, flashlights, and other equipment. "I thought we'd start in the easy places and work our way up to the more challenging ones," Tommy explained as they headed north out of town. "The old stone bridge is a good place to get our bearings." The bridge was exactly as shown on the map, a beautiful structure of assembled stones that spanned Miller's Creek. The water was clear and shallow, flowing over smooth rocks polished by centuries of runoff. "According to the map, we should follow the creek about half a mile upstream," Jake said, looking at the drawing. "There should be a big oak tree with a split trunk." They found the tree without difficulty. It was huge, easily over 100 years old, and its trunk split into 3 main branches about 10 meters above the ground. The map showed that they should head west from this point. "This is where things get interesting," Tommy said, shouldering his backpack. "We're entering some pretty rugged terrain." The forest was dense, thick undergrowth slowing progress. Jake was grateful for Tommy's knowledge of the area and his ability to find his way through the maze of trees and rocks. After walking for about an hour, they came to a small clearing. "Look at this," Tommy called from the far side of the clearing. "There's something carved into the face of this rock." Jake rushed over and found a series of symbols carved into the stone. They were crude but clearly deliberate. There was what looked like an arrow pointing to a narrow gap between 2 large boulders. "That must be it," Jake said excitedly. "There are symbols on the map just like this." The space between the rocks was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to pass through. Tommy went ahead and lit the way with his flashlight. Jake followed him and felt his heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. The narrow passage led into a small cave whose walls had been eroded by water over countless years. The light from Tommy's flashlight showed that the cave extended deep into the hillside. "Wait," Tommy said suddenly and grabbed Jake's arm. "Do you hear that?" Jake listened carefully. There was a faint but distinct sound. It was coming from deep inside the cave. "There's someone else here," Jake whispered. They moved forward carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible. As they neared a bend in the cave passage, the voices became clearer. Jake could make out the voices of at least 2 different speakers, both men, discussing something in low voices. "The old man was right about this place," one of the voices said. "There's definitely something here." "Keep searching," replied the other. "According to our information, it must be somewhere in this section." Jake's blood ran cold. Someone else was looking for the treasure. But how could they know that? Supposedly this secret had been in his family for generations. Tommy motioned for Jake to follow him to the entrance of the cave. Once they were safely outside, they gathered together to discuss their options. "Who do you think these people are?" Tommy asked. "I have no idea, but they obviously didn't come here by chance. Someone else knows about the treasure. What do you want to do?" Jake thought for a moment. "We need to find out who they are and what they know. But we also have to be careful. If they're willing to go into the caves to look for treasure, they might not be very trustworthy people." They decided to wait and watch. They settled behind a large tree with a good view of the cave entrance and waited to see what would happen. After about 30 minutes, two men came out of the cave. They were both middle-aged, wearing hiking clothes and carrying professional-looking equipment. "There's nothing inside," one of them said, looking at what looked like a GPS device. "According to the survey, the next location is about 2 miles south of here." "This is taking longer than expected," the other man replied. "Morrison's grandson should show up any minute." Jake's heart almost stopped. They knew him. Somehow these strangers knew that his grandfather had died and that he had inherited the map. The two men gathered their equipment and headed back towards the main trail. Jake and Tommy waited until they were sure the strangers were gone before they came out of hiding. "Did you hear what they said?" Jake asked. "They said something about Morrison's grandson." "That's me." "But how do they know about you and the treasure?" Jake started to put the pieces together. "My grandfather's funeral was public. His obituary was in the paper. If someone knows the family secret, they could be watching and waiting for the right moment. So what do we do now?" Jake looked at the map again and studied the various locations marked on it. They said they went 2 miles south. That would take them near the old cemetery. But according to this map, the main cache is not in any of these preliminary locations. These are just markers, clues to help lead to the real treasure. So we're all looking in the wrong places? Not exactly wrong, but incomplete. Take a look at this. Jake pointed to a series of small symbols scattered across the map. These markings form a pattern. If you put them together, they point to a place not directly marked on the map. Tommy studied the pattern Jake pointed to. That puts the final location somewhere near Eagle Hill. It's the highest point in this area, and there are several old mining sites there. How long will it take to get there? It's quite a hike, probably 4 or 5 hours. But if you're right about the pattern, we can get there before the other men figure it out. They decided to take the risk. After returning briefly to town to gather more supplies and inform Maggie of their plans, they set off for Eagle Hill. The hike was indeed challenging. The steep slopes and rocky terrain tested Jake's endurance. "Tell me about your grandfather," Tommy said during one of the rest stops. "He sounds like an interesting guy." Jake smiled, thinking of all the stories and lessons his grandfather had shared. "He was amazing. He had a way of making even the most ordinary day feel like an adventure. He taught me that life isn't about playing it safe, but about being curious and brave enough to explore the unknown." Sounds like he prepared you well for this. I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy for believing this treasure story, but then I remember that my grandfather never lied to me about anything important. As they climbed higher, the forest thinned, replaced by rocky outcrops and sparse vegetation. Eagle Peak loomed overhead, its summit shrouded in afternoon clouds. "There," Tommy said, pointing to a section of the mountainside about halfway to the summit. "See that dark area there? That's the entrance to the old Eagle Mine. It was abandoned in the 1920s after a cave-in." Jake looked at the map again. If he had interpreted the symbols correctly, the treasure should be near the mine entrance. As they approached the site, Jake felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made his hands shake. The mine entrance was partially blocked by fallen rocks, but there was still an opening wide enough for a man to pass through. Tommy pulled out a high-powered flashlight and peered into the darkness. "It looks solid enough," he said. "But we have to be careful. You never know what can happen in these old mines." They cautiously entered the mine, using their flashlights to make their way through the narrow tunnel. The air was cool and damp, with a mineral smell that reminded Jake of his grandfather's basement workshop. After about 50 meters, the tunnel opened into a larger room. "Look at this," Tommy said, shining his light on the walls of the room. "These markings are definitely man-made." The walls were covered with symbols similar to the ones they had seen in the cave, but more elaborate. Some looked like numbers or measurements, while others looked like directional indicators. "It's like a giant puzzle," Jake said, examining the signs. Each symbol probably corresponds to a specific location or instruction. They spent the next hour deciphering the symbols, using the map as a reference guide. Gradually, a pattern emerged. The symbols formed a sequence leading to a specific part of the room floor. "Here," Jake said, kneeling next to what looked like a natural depression in the rock. "According to the symbols, this is where it should be." They began carefully removing loose stones and soil from the depression. About 2 meters down, Tommy's shovel hit something hard. "There's something here," he said excitedly. Working together, they cleared away more rubble, revealing a wooden chest about 2 feet square and a foot deep. The wood was old and worn, but the chest looked solid. "This is it," Jake whispered. "This is the one." They carefully removed the chest from its hiding place and set it on a flat section of the room floor. The lid was secured with an old-fashioned metal latch that opened with a satisfying click. Inside the chest was a collection of items that took Jake's breath away. There were gold coins, some dating back to the 1800s, as well as several pieces of jewelry and rare artifacts from the area's mining past. "Your great-grandfather was telling the truth," Tommy marveled. "This is incredible." But Jake was more interested in a leather-bound diary that lay on top of the other items. He carefully opened it and found pages filled with his great-grandfather's handwriting, documenting not only the treasure hunt, but the whole story of how the cache was hidden. According to the diary, the treasure was actually stolen from a train robbery in 1887. The bandits hid the treasure in the mine, intending to retrieve it later. But before they could retrieve the treasure, they were caught and killed in a shootout with law enforcement. Samuel discovered the cache by accident while exploring the mine in 1923. Instead of reporting it to the authorities, he and his partners decided to keep it hidden, taking only a small portion to help their family through a difficult time. "Listen to this," Jake said, reading from the diary. Samuel writes this: "The real treasure is not gold or jewels, but the knowledge that we can choose to do the right thing even when no one is watching. We could have taken everything, but we chose to leave most of it to future generations who may need it more than we do." Tommy was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of these words. "So what do we do now? Do we take it?" Jake looked at the trunk and its contents, then at the journal entries that revealed his great-grandfather's wisdom and honesty. "I guess we follow his example. We take what we need and leave the rest for the future." They carefully selected a few of the most valuable items that would help Jake pay off his student loans and give Tommy a chance to start the nature guide business he had always dreamed of. They left the rest in the chest, along with a note explaining their decision and the location of the stash. "Future generations of the family will know where to find this when they need it," Tommy said as they prepared to leave the mine. As they walked down the mountain, Jake felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had found the treasure, but more importantly, he had discovered something about his family's values and his own character. Do you know what the best part of this whole adventure was? Jake asked as they walked. Finding the real treasure? No, though it was quite surprising. The best part was learning that my grandfather's stories were true. All those lessons about courage, honesty, and doing the right thing weren't just pretty words. They were a family legacy. Back in town, Jake and Tommy kept their discovery a secret and shared the story only with Maggie, who listened with a smile that said she had suspected something like this all along. "Your grandfather was a wise man," she said. "And you are following in his footsteps perfectly." Jake stayed in Millbrook for another week, helping Tommy plan his guide job and learning more about the town's history. The two men searching for the treasure never returned, apparently having given up when they found nothing in easier places. Before leaving town, Jake made a donation to the local historical society to fund a project to preserve some of the old buildings and mining artifacts in the area. He didn't mention the treasure, but he made sure the donation was big enough to make a real difference. On his last day in Millbrook, Jake visited his grandfather's grave and placed a small gold coin on the headstone, a token of gratitude for the greatest treasure of all, the knowledge that some things are worth more than money and that the best adventures are the ones that help us discover who we really are. The journey home gave Jake time to reflect on everything that had happened. He had set out on this journey in search of treasure and had found something much more valuable, a better understanding of his family's legacy and his place in it. His grandfather had been right about many things. The greatest treasures in life are indeed the connections we make along the way, and sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones we find within ourselves. As Jake pulled into the driveway, he was already planning his next adventure. After all, his grandfather had told him many stories over the years, and now he knew they were all true. The world was full of mysteries waiting to be solved, and he had a lifetime to explore. But this time he wouldn't be going alone. Tommy had already agreed to join him on his next adventure, and Jake was looking forward to having a true partner in exploration. Together, they would follow in the footsteps of Samuel and Henry Morrison, carrying on a family tradition of courage, honesty, and the pursuit of knowledge. The treasure hunt was over, but the real adventure was just beginning.